here at MotorEx again, and we have run into Nigel Petrie and his insane, I think you said it's a Hilux.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for...
That's what I call it anyway.
All right, well, what is it exactly? Because there's not much Hilux left, and how did you come up with this crazy project? I've seen it floating around, but I've never seen it in person. It's absolutely mental. So give us a rundown.
Yeah.
What is it?
I don't know how long you got, but I'll keep it short, not too technical. So basically what I wanted to do was to build a drift Hilux.
Yeah.
Now
you said you were towing with this car, right?
Yeah, originally I had a Hilux mini truck because I love that style, and then I was doing drifting as well. And I always had this idea to make a drift mini truck, but I wanted to do it in a fashion that it really didn't take too much away from the natural stance of a Hilux mini truck, but at the same time work properly. So what I sort of came up with was a full space frame chassis that was all basically hand fabricated by myself. So I bought the Hilux cab, cut everything out that I didn't need, sat it on the ground, worked out my wheelbase, which I wanted was 2700 mil.
So you did have a Hilux to start with?
No, all I started with was the actual cabin that bolts onto the chassis. So cut the back out of that, cut everything out. All I really needed was a roof skin and enough to hold the doors on. So that's what I started with, and the rest has all been hand fabricated. So that involved about 70 meters of round tube. I built my own tube bender. I bought a welder off eBay.
Built a tube bender.
I built a tube bender. And then pretty much as I'd go along the build, I'd sort of research what works and what doesn't, and what other people use in different forms of motorsport. And sort of learnt so much along the way of the 3.5 years that it took to build it, that it really just came together.
And you thought it was going to be a 6-month project?
Yeah. My first, well, when I started, I believed that I could get it done in 6 months, and then 6 months in, I basically had hardly started. So I had this motor in an S13 chassis, pulled it out of that. I used some wheels that I had, some uprights, laid everything out basically on the floor. So I started with all the parts. So I put the motor where I wanted it to be, I put the cab where I wanted it to be, I put the seats where I wanted those to be, I put the rear end where that needed to be, so wheelbase of 2700, and then pretty much ran tube everywhere to connect everything, and then sheet metal in the spots that needed it, and then started to refine everything. So there's very few standard Hilux parts. What are standard are the indicators, headlights, front grille, bumper. The good thing about building a drift car out of a Hilux, these are about $30. So you can run it really close to the ground and drag them off whenever you need.
Well, it's not like you're very close to the ground at all.
No. So what I did was, once the frame was all sort of tacked up and everything was where it needed to be, I started fabricating each individual part to suit the front setup. So I basically hung all the front panels, all the guards that you see. I molded stock fenders with bog to get the shape that I needed. Took a plug off those and made a fiberglass mold. And now I've got the fiberglass mold, so I can recreate the panels when I need to.
I've noticed it's not metal anymore. Like, is everything fiberglass?
Not everything. The bit that holds the windscreen's metal, the roof skin is metal, and the doors are just an outer skin of metal as well.
Okay.
Everything else is fiberglass. So fiberglass bonnet, fiberglass guards.
You did all that yourself?
Did all that myself, yeah.
Okay.
So I went to PWR with the design and the horsepower that I was after.
Crazy?
No, they love the idea. I think they're sort of on a similar level to me. So they love the idea, and they came up with a cooling package for me.
Yep.
This whole setup here at the front removes with just 4 bolts. So you remove those, all the fluid has quick connect fittings. So you can pull the whole front off the car with 4 bolts and no spills. So oil cooler, radiator, the whole lot, all just pulls off the front of the car.
Okay. Engine, what have you
Engine's
got?
an S13 version SR20.
Yep.
So 9:1 compression, built bottom end, 264 inlet cam, 272 exhaust. It makes about 336 real world kilowatts on 22 pound. TD06 turbo. And then obviously custom fabricated everything on the power steering pump to the setup that actually times the car. So I made my own trigger setup on the cam wheel and on the crank as well. great cabin. It's a pretty tight setup in here. Obviously a pretty upright seating position to get far enough back into the car to allow my legs and everything to operate the pedals. So it's got a Willwood pedal box, mounted that along with custom-made steering column. Made the steering column from scratch, and then all the interior pieces are basically the tube frame with some sheeting in to wrap around the gearbox, which is a Quaife sequential 6-speed.
Yep.
So the Quaife sequential 6-speed was never really intended to be in the car. I put an RB25 5-speed in it, and at the first event that I did in it at World Time Attack, it broke third gear and sort of left me needing something a little bit stronger. So yeah, from that it sort of runs back to this whole setup in the rear. Out the back here you'll notice the 16 volt battery. So I don't actually run an alternator on this car. I run a 16 volt battery, and then it's an alternatorless setup. So basically from the tail shaft back, it runs an R33 GDR diff and R33 GDR drive shafts into S15 uprights. I made the rear cradle myself. I made all the arms out of chromoly. It runs another V8 supercar setup sway bar, and yeah, it's all kept really simple out the back here. Anything is that wasn't needed wasn't put in there. All I really needed to do was to get the exhaust out the back of the car. These rear guards I moulded from scratch, and they're based on, a normal Hilux is 2850mm, this is 2700, so there's 150mm taken out of this section here. So it's a bit shorter than normal, but it makes it really good because it's sort of like when you lower a car down, it looks longer. So I wanted to keep all the proportions of the factory Hilux. Yeah, it's a car that is very unforgiving. If it blows a belt, it's going to take all the guards off. It's going to scratch up all of my clear powder coat that the chassis is coated in.
Pretty panel.
All those pretty panels. But at the same time, it's all pretty flexible. So, yeah, it's basically my ideal drift car.
3 years in the making, though.
3 years in the making, yeah. It was a lot of work.
You're going to be out on the track shortly, so I would love to see if we can get some footage from that. And yeah, keen to see it on the track.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, thank you very much.
Have a good weekend.
Cheers, thank you.